Hello, my name is Jared Holden. I'm a lecturer here at the University of Staffordshire and I teach concept art for games and film.
And I'm Dr. Chris Windmill. I'm a senior lecturer in game design and programming.
And welcome to Developer Mode. In today's video, I'm going to be talking us through an approach to iterative development using study to concept techniques, leveraging some studies that I've produced earlier. So yeah, Chris, how are we doing today?
Not too bad. It's a lovely day outside, and hopefully this is going to be one of the most interesting ones because we're going to get to see what the students will actually be doing in class. So Jared was telling me earlier this is something they actually do as an icebreaker for students because it introduces them to Photoshop, it introduces them to the idea of concept studies, as well as giving you a good introduction to lecturers and a good chance to walk through processes.
Absolutely. This is an icebreaker task that we do with a level 5 group for their first module, which is Mastering Study to Concepts. And Chris, on the screen at the moment, I have a number of studies that I produced in my own time. And I did these studies as a sort of opportunity to familiarize myself with the nuances of different kinds of animals. And what I'm going to be doing today is taking those animals, pulling them apart, and bringing them back together again to make some unique sort of creature concept design. So this should be quite a fun exercise. Chris, out of curiosity, between the three that I've got here, which one would you want me to sort of take forward and begin with?
I would probably go with the hyena. They're a really interesting species that they're cat-based but look like dogs. Very interesting social hierarchies and things. So I think if we're looking at this from sort of the perspective of what can we concept out of it, I think hyenas have got sort of possibly a bad reputation in life, but such beautiful animals.
Yeah, amazing. So what I'll do then is I've just copied the hyena. I'm going to duplicate it and just bring it to one side for the moment. I'm going to toggle off my previous layers so that they are not distracting. And then with my hyena, what I'm going to do is this serves as a really nice base for our concept. So as a good jumping off point, rather than immediately going in and doing any kind of painting, I'm going to just warp this creature, really, really change up some major proportions using some of the functions in Photoshop. So at the moment, I'm thinking, you mentioned about this being sort of a carnivorous animal. I think with that in mind, I kind of want to turn it into some kind of like ungulate herbivorous creature. So I've just gone in immediately and warped some of its features, and I'm going to continue to do that. Trying to really, really raise up those limbs. I'm then going to isolate parts of the hyena, such as its head, and do the exact same thing. So I've just warped the body. I want to do the exact same thing with the animal's head, just to really sort of change up its shape. I think we can maybe do this in a bit more of a specific way. There we go. Perfect. Now, part of the reason why I'm doing this whole thing of like chopping it into bits and playing around with it with these warp functions is not only to preserve the bits of the drawing that I like, but also warping it in this way, you don't necessarily know what to expect. You end up with these sort of happy accidents that can end up carrying forward into a really interesting looking design. So there we go. I've chopped my hyena into bits. I'm going to maybe shrink down the head slightly. Something to that sort of size, as this animal doesn't really rely on its bite all that much, so it can do with a smaller head. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at bringing this image back together again. So it's all very, very much broken up. But within those series of sort of abstract shapes that are left behind by my initial work, there is something recognizable that we're beginning to piece together here. So I've picked the mixer brush, and holding Alt, I can begin to color pick different parts of the hyena image. If we treat this like a color palette that I've arranged for myself, this allows me to isolate parts of that palette so that it becomes really easy to manipulate. So that's exactly what we're going to do.
It's a really cool technique. I think one of the interesting things as well that Jared just mentioned is sort of Again, sort of programmers and designers, we watch a lot of Bob Ross and similar, and sort of happy little accidents. You know, in education, there's no point where you go wrong by trying something.
No, absolutely. And I mean, sort of expanding on that, as a concept artist, those happy accidents are kind of your job, because something that you'd be expected to do is you might be set a brief by a client or an art director, or just a sort of an interested party or a producer, and they are wanting you to make something distinctive. So I might be asked, Jared, you go away and make some sort of cool mastodon-looking creature, and I will produce sort of 30 designs. And my hope is for those to be as distinctive as possible, so that when I give them back to my art director, they have some options to pick between, and so that their decision making is well informed, and we ultimately can lead to something that's going to be visually interesting.
So when you're doing this, are you thinking about sort of animal anatomy as you're doing this, or just going with feel first and then? So a bit of both. I'd say feel first in most cases. So I'm just going to walk this guy down slightly. Feel first in most instances. However, something to consider, especially for aspiring concept artists, is that part of your job will be to enrich your visual library. And your visual library is your lived experience, things that you encounter in the real world that you find interesting, that end up finding a home in your head that you can then refer back to when it comes to doing design work. And it's not always in a conscious way. So many times, myself and my colleagues and the students that we teach, they will be sort of incentivized to go out and do their own studies and to go to museums, and we'll bring in interesting life models for them to study, so that they have that sort of chance to enrich their visual library. But it is also a passive thing. Those sort of what you find interesting, you will find out in the world and will just sort of sit in your head. And certainly in my case, I have a background in sort of natural history. I like my animals. Part of the reason why this approach sort of sings to me. Because I have that background and because it sits in the back of my head, it's very, very easy for me to leverage. So I'm just going to make a few more big changes to this thing. And then I think we'll move on to another design. I kind of wish we'd picked the mole now. So was it the A Bridge to Terabithia, where they had a character typed by the giant mole? And I remember watching a video about that one where they had the animators and all that sort of down on the ground trying to work out how, a giant mole would move. Well, I think Chris, I'll carry on with the mole then in that case. I think I've got something I would like to do with the mole actually. Just going to, there we go. That works. So this functions very nicely as a simple, straightforward thumbnail of an interesting looking sort of herbivorous animal. It didn't take me very long, and because I already had my study there, I already had a very, very solid foundation to build on top of. Part of the reason why I find this so useful for students is it eases them into this idea of play. Rather than having to worry about, oh my gosh, I've got to generate this idea from scratch. If they already have that study, there's no reason that they shouldn't use that information for their design work. So I've got my interesting looking sort of herbivorous animal. I'm going to set that to one side. I'll pop it over here for the moment. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate it. Because if I've got one thumbnail that's already doing something quite interesting, there's no reason that I can't then begin to develop this even further and again, stumble upon something fun through this new image that I've got. You mentioned about the mole. Let's start using the mole as well. So we've got the mole. And the bits that I find interesting about this animal that I think I'm going to want to carry forward are the rays. So star-nosed moles have a series of rays that bracket their snout. And that to me is the most interesting part of the study. So I'm going to use it. So we'll toggle off those previous images. And then using my second hyena thumbnail, let's see, how can we merge these two?
Let's see. See if we can just stumble upon it, really. So,
possibly worth thinking something like a giant sloth with sort of, the giant grippy claws for...
yes. In fact, yes. Yeah, I think I might make some pretty radical changes to my thumbnail to use some of the stuff that's in this mole. Oh, just realized I'm using the wrong brush.
So again, when we're thinking about anatomy and things, one of the things to really consider is evolution doesn't aim for perfect, it aims for what works. So body plans like crabs have been invented multiple times. There are many things throughout history that look like sharks and similar. So a lot of body plans come together to fill an evolutionary niche, not just,
That is, absolutely. That's an expectation for sort of students that study on the course, is that you end up becoming a bit of a nerd about various different topics, like sort of evolution and in this case, what you're talking about is things like adaptive radiation.
Adaptive evolution or adaptive biology?
Oh my goodness, can't think of what it's called. It's not adaptive radiation. Effectively, yeah, you're totally right in that there is a set and effective way that animals can sort of be constructed. There are set body plans that work. And the one that always comes to mind for me is things like ichthyosaurs and dolphins, which share almost an identical body plan in terms of being sort of these teardrop-shaped animals with these conical snouts, these fins and dorsals that are largely all in the same place. The main difference is their locomotion. Ichthyosaurs swim from side to side. Dolphins, their fluke goes up and down. Otherwise, they're very, very similar, despite one being coming from a lineage of reptiles and another being a cetacean. I said I was going to make some more sort of radical changes to this, and I think I certainly will. So I've taken parts of the mole that I like, those rays that I mentioned, and now I'm just going to make the hyena head actually sort of work with those changes. So I'm suggesting that this thing has like this long snout and its lower jaw has these sort of weird rays coming off from it. But now, as mentioned, I really want to change up the body in some fun and interesting way. And I think for that, I'm going to refer back to one of my other previous studies, which is, if I can find it, my elephant. So
at this point, are you thinking about the ecology of this animal as well, or?
At the moment, this is just play. I certainly could. I think what I want to do with this one is maybe take it in the direction of like sort of a therizinosaur, herbivorous animal that is rotund in its build and uses long grasping arms and a long neck to reach for sort of high up trees and vegetation. So we're going to use the elephant's body for that. So I don't need its head. Get rid of that. I'm going to keep the body. And I think as well, we're going to take these forelimbs and treat them as though they are sort of elevated arms. Again, I'm really using my study. There's not too much that I want to... I'm being very, very careful not to spend too long sort of drawing necessarily or painting, because there's a lot of information here that I can use readily. And it's time effective more than anything else.
It's really interesting to see, because again, sort of from a design and programming point of view, my thought sort of immediately goes to, where would the animal come from, sort of what sort of environment and similar, sort of trying to flesh out everything rather than just sort of again, it's really interesting, as you keep saying, play.
Yes.
Experiment, see what happens, and then work out stuff later.
This is an approach that I use for concepting, certainly in my own time. But also I find this to be a really, really, really wonderful warm-up exercise. So I get into work in the beginning of the day with the expectation that I'm going to be doing loads of like demonstrations or helping out students with feedback. And this is a nice way of just easing myself into that. So I'm going to merge these two images together. So again, going for sort of like a therizinosaur build with these mostly angled upright forelimbs. Complete with the same kind of large claws. I'm going to get rid of the other arm I'm going to get rid of the other arm just for the moment.
Did the mole have nice claws on it, or?
It did have nice claws. I'm coming back to that.
I was thinking again, as you were saying earlier, about using the studies rather than drawing freely.
Well, I've got a very, very nice example of how we can think about doing that. I think I've made the forelimbs maybe so big that I want to scale up these hind limbs a bit more. To an extent, just a bit like that. And then I think, so that we can have some internal consistency throughout the design. With this coloration of fur, I'm going to reintroduce, and we're going to have it come down here. Having that repetition helps the overall design sort of read correctly to the audience. The real big point to emphasize with this exercise is, again, we will expect students, especially if people are interested in joining concept art for games and film, we will be expecting students to be doing studies in their own time. And we will provide material so that, again, we're enriching students with a visual library. And this is partly why, not just for the sake of practice, but so that it genuinely has a use in your artwork. So in this case, these are studies that I've done of animals to familiarize myself with their gait and the sort of textures and skin tone throughout their bodies, and the nuances that I would otherwise miss if I was just trying to guess. And because I have that information, because it's so readily available to me, it's really easy to find fun ways of appropriating it. So I'm going to cheat a little bit now. I want to reintroduce this thing's other arm. But I don't want to redraw it from scratch because that takes too long. So I'm just going to angle it correctly. We're going to create a clipping mask.
So again, when you talk about gait and things there, again, coming through on the other aspects of game design is when you're thinking about animals and similar. So a lot of game students build games that involve cats, dogs, squirrels and similar. They don't move the same way that humans do. So sort of, again, those kind of studies are always really interesting to see, how animals move and how they react. So probably one of the questions you get a lot of the time, Jared, what's the strangest or sort of coolest thing a student's ever concepted? Weirdest?
Oh my goodness, that is a tough question because I've been teaching now for about coming up to like 5 years. I've seen a lot of weird and wonderful stuff come out of students. It's not the weirdest, but certainly one that I remember really liking was there was a student, I think last year, who did a sort of interesting goat-like animal whose horns were meant to sort of mimic filigree on like the design of a shield. And it had almost like this narwhal-like tusk that was meant to echo like a lance. So it was, medieval design work originating in an animal that I remember finding really appealing. So there we go. That functions quite nicely as a design. I might rescale the head ever so slightly. And I'm going to try and pretty quickly do some rapid fire ones as well, because this has taken a bit of time to do. So go.
So if you could set the audience a challenge of, you got to pick two animals that they do a concept merging them together, what do you think would be a really interesting challenge for the viewers to put onto our Discord or something so we can have a look at it?
I think something that'd be really, really wonderful to do is to look at doing a digital study of if you have any household pets and turning them into a fun concept design. And I would challenge turning a household pet into some kind of aquatic predator. I think would be very, very cool. So I'm just going to pop him over there. In fact, I'm going to scale him down a bit more. So we've done 2 of them thus far. Relatively straightforward. I'm going to toggle this one off, and I'm going to now use the animal that I really, really love for this exercise, because I find elephants to be super enjoyable.
So can I be evil and suggest we turn this one into some kind of aquatic animal?
We will. I will have a go at that in just a second, because there's something I want to just very, very quickly illustrate with this in terms of thinking in an abstract way. So
well, it's really interesting the way when you do the warp meshes, sort of what it changes to the animal.
Yes, 100%. I mean, and it can be sort of in a really, really deliberate way, but other times, again, like it's more like a cloud spotting challenge where I will make a weird sort of warping motion to the head or to a part of the animal's body, and then I will sort of spot something within that, a motive potential that I can then change into something else. And that's exactly what I'm going to do now, actually. So I'm going to copy and delete the elephant's tusk. It's going to let me. And, sorry, not tusk, it's trunk. And I'm going to start thinking about its trunk as something completely different. So this is where the abstracting element comes in. Yes, I have done this study with the knowledge of I want this to be an elephant. And so everything within it is meant to sort of evoke that. But when it comes to my own design work, there's no reason that the elephant's trunk needs to remain that way. And in this case, I'm thinking about it as a series of tusks and maybe a singular large horn. That is going to be very different shapes, the tusks on the lower side.
So if any of you are in London at any point, the Natural History Museum has a huge, up next to the whale, there's a giant selection of sort of pseudo-elephants. So you've got ones that look like elephants as we know them now, ones with multiple sets of horns and various other things. And it's really cool to see again how, evolution doesn't have a plan, but
there are body plans that work, but something I always think is the most interesting is periods in time where adaptive radiation takes place. And normally this is following a big extinction event where a lot of environmental niches have been emptied due to the species going extinct. And so different species whose niche up until that point has been something super specific, they begin to rapidly diversify to fill those empty niches. And that's where you end up with really strange looking animals. Things like sort of Tanistropheus, Erythrosuchus, all have these really wild proportions. Tanistropheus having this incredibly long and very, very stiff neck. Remind myself. And Erythrosuchus with this oversized, sort of almost very, very T-Rex looking head that was disproportionately massive and largely unnecessary, or not unnecessary, but inefficient, which is partly why the animal went extinct. But it is sort of nature playing around a little bit to see what works. And we have examples of that with mastodons. So this whole shovel bottom jaw that I've gone with, it isn't necessarily one-to-one, but if you look at animals like Platybelodon, which I adore, Platybelodon is a relative of the modern elephant, that has this really crazy lower jaw that is meant to help them just scoop up vegetation in sort of swampy bog environments. A really interesting looking creature. But now, okay, so so that's an example of this sort of idea of abstraction taking place. And I think you wanted to see if I could do like an aquatic looking creature.
Yeah, well, if we set it as a challenge for the viewers, if anyone want to do it onto the Discord or similar, then, it'd probably be interesting to show sort of your process going through it, how to take something that is, classically a land animal and sort of turn it into something that works for the ocean.
Absolutely. So I think what we're going to need to do is, again, quite radical changes to the animal. Some of the marks that I'm making are deliberate. Some of them are sort of, there's an intentionality behind what, like the marks that I'm placing down. But in other instances, it's kind of guesswork. This random sort of stumbling upon something interesting, I think, is what makes this particular approach to sort of blue sky thumbnailing, blue sky referring to very early stage iterative development. I think that's what makes this sort of so fun. So
yeah, one of the really interesting things is aquatic often includes a huge variety of body plans. There's the old statement that there's no such thing as a fish.
Yes.
Because basically all fish are not related to each other. And then we also get things like otters, beavers, frogs. So in an environment like water, there's so much more that can be done for animals.
Which is why it's one of the most sort of, again, for any kind of design work, it's the most freeing. That said, we're always very, very, very concerned with like the rules, which again is where that sort of knowledge of different areas of design comes in. But it's not so much a limiting factor. So yes, I if I come into a project, if I'm working on a Subnautica is currently on the mind. If I'm doing any kind of design work for Subnautica, then absolutely, I want to be very, very concerned with, or I'll want to make sure that I'm refreshed on my sort of deep sea aquatic animals, and how they work. But it's not the effort of trying to limit my design work. If anything, it's just to try and include these interesting design elements that are going to help make my creature look distinctive, and also to be a little bit of a reward for the audience. I know certainly, especially looking at some of the designs in the new Subnautica game, there are things that I remember having seen or being interested in that I can spot in some of the new Leviathans that are featured in that game, which again is rewarding. I remember seeing, not necessarily in Subnautica, but certainly in other games, animals with like recumbent jaws where the teeth are sort of are flowing outward. That I know from sort of the sort of historical record where those similar types of animals can be found, and that's very, very enjoyable for me, certainly.
So is there any point in this sort of process you'd think about changing the color palette or similar?
Yes, absolutely. So this is where obviously having my other thumbnails is super, super useful, because I can start to actually hodgepodge different colors together. In this instance, I'm just trying to figure out what to do with that hind flipper.
See, and one of the really cool things about aquatic animals is that a lot of them have really interesting colors. Again, the deeper we go into the ocean, the less light we get. So we end up with animals that are basically, or can be, white to our vision, but in the infrared spectrums or ultraviolets, you end up with these beautiful colorations. And as far as I remember, you also end up with a relatively large number of sort of bluish things in the ocean compared to on land.
You especially find lots of what you would refer to as like two-toned colorations. So if you imagine a shark or an orca or a dolphin as well, they tend to have a lighter underside and a darker sort of back plane. And the reason being, from an evolutionary standpoint, is if a predatory animal is looking at the underside of a dolphin and the underside of a dolphin is light, they're looking at it from below, the sun and light confuses their vision. And so because the dolphin's underside is white, it's much harder for them to discern. Likewise, if it is darker, it's a sort of camouflage technique. And that's all well and good. It's a useful and interesting piece of information. But from a design perspective, as far as I'm concerned, a two-tone body is like shorthand for this animal's aquatic. In the same way that flippers are, in the same way that like dorsals are features that denote that. I'm wondering, am I on the wrong layer? No, I'm on the right layer.
So one of the things I find really interesting is when we look at animals, of course, we'll look at it as a species with 3-color perception, red, green, and blue. So when you look at a tiger, to us, it's orange in the jungle, and it looks a bit silly to us. But their actual prey only has 2-color receptors. So to them, the tiger blends in incredibly well. So it's one of those bits where you start thinking about, what is the natural environment this animal might be in? And so, something could be horrifically bright pink, but if its prey or similar has never evolved to see pink, that's suddenly camouflage.
No, I'm completely distracting myself now with this. Okay. Again, it's such a freeing and enjoyable process. That I sort of insist upon students having a practice with outside of the actual task that we set them on this, just because of how much it can sort of make the whole process of like iterative development so much more relaxing.
Yeah, it's really cool to see, Jared. It's an expert having fun in their field and just enjoying themselves.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Again, it's that whole sort of when you're watching this, it's sort of what is he thinking? How is he trying to pull this together? And
you can trust me, I don't know. It's something that I completely stumble on, which is what makes this process so enjoyable. Let's get rid of its head.
Remember, if you have any pets at home, please don't take off their head.
There we go. So I'm starting to think, actually, I want this animal's head for this process. Another huge part of this is just how fast this process can be. I'm being quite deliberate with it for the purpose of obviously sharing this exercise. But again, part of the use of this is it really doesn't take long for you to end up on something interesting and distinctive. And in a working sort of fast-paced environment like games design and game development, or any kind of development, outside of games, things like concept work for film is rapid. And so if there are efficient and tactful ways of using sort of other skills that have been developed, then that's fantastic. And that's going to make you more employable, which is something that we're sort of super concerned with.
This one started to make me think of a duck-billed elephant.
I don't know what it's going to be.
It's okay.
I don't know.
That's why we're playing. We're exploring.
was going to say, Chris, do you have a sort of favorite like piece of like, creature design that you've seen in media?
Oh,
What comes to mind?
I think if it comes down to it, I think the xenomorphs from Aliens are probably one of my favorites. Because, again, it was the case of how do they make something that's inhuman but also, moves well. And the guy in the suit doing the outfit, the way he moves with them is really sort of inhuman. It really captures that sort of...
Oh, especially in that first film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just... Again, it's a man in a suit, but it's so beautifully done. So for a practical effect, I think that's one of my favourite ones. For sort of pure CG stuff, that's a hard one. I don't know, pure CG, that's a really hard one. There's so many beautiful designs. Probably something from sort of Final Fantasy X or similar. There's sort of, Sin, or that sort of the idea of it's a whale, but it's not a whale, and, it's sort of something that from our universe is very, whales are beautiful, they're peaceful, they live in the oceans, they create life, and yet in that world it is a sort of harbinger of doom, which, again, really sort of twists it.
Yeah.
And similarly, when I'm thinking about these kind of things, I really love sort of the Warhammer 40k universe. There's some of the old quotes by sort of Jez Goodwin and sort of John Blanche and that about, understanding anatomy so that, because again, things like orcs and similar, huge muscular forms and all that. So you've got to understand anatomy to make them work. And it makes it bad when you're watching a film. So don't go watch a Conan film because you'll sit there and go, that's not the anatomy of a guy who swings a sword around. But you start seeing what the artists are talking about, seeing how a cat moves, how it starts to pounce, or things like a squirrel, the rapid movement, how it aligns on things, how it aligns its body. And it makes you really sort of think, when someone's building an enemy or something in a game, it's like, it's not just, it is potentially just a piece of concept art, one image, but what's gone through the artist's mind, there's an entire sort of evolution there of what the animal was, what it did, what it sort of lives in, how it lives, how it hunts. So again, it's this kind of play of, well, I want it to look like something, but it's also not.
Yeah.
So the giant moa from New Zealand.
Yep, that's sort of where I'm going with it.
Yeah.
I was thinking something elephantine again initially.
What's coming to mind for me here is the Kroot from Warhammer 40k.
Which, funnily enough, is the army that I collect. I collect Kroot Tau because, I don't know,
that
very
bird
niche.
Yeah, things like the moa, it's a giant bird that's essentially flightless. Yeah, I think, 3-4 meters tall? And you're just thinking, wait, what? But again, it works, it fits. Or kiwi, they're essentially flightless birds that fill, the sort of small mammal role. But since there wasn't a small mammal to fill the role, a bird did. Or when you get sort of the Galapagos finches and sort of all the different beak designs, and literally between two islands with not very far between them, you get huge changes there in what makes them work. So, yeah, when you start thinking about this, of where does this animal fit in? Is it an ecology?
Yeah, that's when you can land on something really interesting.
I think one of the great things about games is not only do you get the freedom to look at beyond what evolution has done on our planet, so you can do sort of what ifs, but you've also got that sort of team of other people there to bounce it off. So it's not just, you can take a concept and someone else sort of thinks about it and goes, this is something I didn't think about that. And that sort of collaborative work, I don't know if it carries across to concepts.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, it's even between myself and fellow members of staff, we're constantly sort of sharing ideas with one another for the purpose of seeing, of piquing our own interest. So,
now, what I'm really wondering is, have you seen the Dark Crystal?
I have, yes, yeah, the Skeksis.
Yeah. Can we give him some kind of scarf or similar that makes him...
We certainly could. Yeah.
Let's make him sort of a sentient animal. Let's...
For going sentient.
Or at the very least, like scarves or something.
See if I can very, very quickly.
And don't do this at home. Don't know your concept artists.
Let's see. Going to very, very quickly just try and modify this thing's posture so that we can make it something closer to a character in how it's presenting itself. A bigger brush is going to come in handy.
So what would you say, sort of, when you're concepting, the major difference between sort of an animal and a character are?
Honestly, I think it comes down to intention. I think as soon as you take a creature and if you place a scar on its face for the purpose of saying that this thing has been in a fight that you should care about as the audience, then suddenly I think you're stepping more into the realm of creature design. Of character design, because I think there is an intention to start describing a character. And so I find that nuance really, really interesting. I'd say obviously there's the very, very deliberate ways that you could go to illustrate that. So, actually introducing clothing, making the thing intelligent enough that it's capable of speech. Those will all contribute. Yeah, asked about the scarf. Let's see.
I'm just thinking things like Paddington Bears or the guys from sort of Dark Crystal with sort of, neck pieces. So it seems to be sort of a fairly common way to sort of, this is an intelligent being. Everyone needs a good scarf.
Let's see if we can suggest that there's sticky keys. Let's see. Can we imply that? Let's go with like a light sort of lavenderish purple. I've been predominantly using the mixer brush for this, but there's no reason why we can't use just a normal hard round with opacity on. Even in a very, very small way, makes it look as though this creature is sort of turning away, having a personality to it. Cool. So any sort of final questions then, Chris, with regards to any of this?
No, I think that's been beautiful and wonderful. We've gone through sort of a couple of studies and then changed them into things. And I think I've thrown a couple of curveballs at you as...
Let me see if I can grab very quickly my favorite. I think honestly, I'm super happy with these two from a speedy little process.
The one at the top very much reminds me like a tardigrade. I do love those little guys.
Like a very, very big sort of elephantine tardigrade. Yeah. No, I hope you enjoyed that process, Chris.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this video.